All right. Man, I am so excited with what God's doing here at this church and in this time. I'm so looking forward to the month of August, and we've got some incredible things to talk about the upcoming season as a church. And man, I cannot wait till we get there. But I love to see God at work, because God is literally taking time, and he's literally bringing people and positioning people and putting things in people's hearts to get ourselves established and ready for this next season of where God's taking us. And man, I cannot wait to do it. I cannot wait to walk through it. I cannot wait to partner with you in this next season of how God's calling us to impact our community and how to reach people. And man, I'm looking forward to it. And today I've got, as far as this sermon portion goes, I've got good news for some and bad news for others. And so it just depends on what kind of personality you have. Today, we only have 2 more weeks left in this series that we've been in, Living Letters. I know. Some of you, you're like, it is about time. We've been doing this since Easter's. But for others, you're like, oh no, Jonathan, I've loved it so much. I know, you'll tell me later, because you're not going to tell me now. You want to do it in private. Just going to make me be up here and sweat and feel like a failure. No, I'm kidding. I'm super excited. But we got this week and next week, and man, it's good. And if you've been here, whether it's your first time here or you've been here this whole series, we've been walking through the New Testament letters, the epistles, and we've been learning how to read them so we can best extrapolate, best receive the incredible richness of these letters. And we have an understanding that these letters are not just old things that we can reference, but they're literally alive and well, that they can make a change in how we live. It can answer questions that our daily lives face, and man, it can give us direction and wisdom on how to live in a society and a culture that's ever changing. And so we've been walking through those things, and we've been learning how to read those letters in context, putting them through some filters that help us better understand where they're going. And we're going to do that for today's book. We're going to actually be diving into the book of Colossians today and extrapolating a little bit. But the theory or the theme of what we're wanting to talk about today is similar to something we talked about last week, but a little different. Last week, we took a look at 1 Peter, and we talked about persecution and what happens when we go through hard times and struggles and hardship. And we walked through that, and that's an uncomfortable place to be, because we don't like that. But it's something they were dealing with in the Old Testament, and in the New Testament believing churches, and it's something that we deal with today as well. But today, we're going to deal with a subject it's kind of similar, but it's a little different. And it's something that we're kind of familiar with, but it is the idea of pressure. And we use pressure a lot. Some of you love to use an Instapot, which I hate to break it to you, that is just a pressure cooker. I know some of you are like, what? That's blasphemy. It's fine. I have an Instapot, it's great. But we talk about pressure, but really the way I use pressure a lot, and maybe you too, I like sports. And we talk about pressure a lot in sports, because really we determine how good an athlete is or how well they perform based on how they perform in pressure, right? When we talk about the truly greats of any sport, it doesn't matter if it's football or basketball or soccer or golf. We have these people who are on this pedestal of greatness, and really the reason that we talk about it is because under pressure, they can perform at really high levels consistently. Sometimes we call them clutch. Sometimes we call them goats. Sometimes we call them all sorts of things because sports people are weird. But we enjoy this idea. We want to see people who can perform in pressure. And we see people who can rise up in pressure-filled situations. And then we see some people who can do really great when there's no pressure. But the moment that pressure hits or it becomes really crunch time, they seem to fade away and fail under pressure. And we have this in our lives. We see this, and we see this in these sports things. I remember I watched a documentary that's on Netflix about Michael Jordan, and he was somebody who thrived under pressure. In fact, when there wasn't enough pressure, he really just didn't play. So he literally would go around and would make up scenarios that were not really there to create an atmosphere where there was pressure and competition so that he could go and perform to the level that he wanted to do. Like little things that no one meant to do any disrespect, he would take very personally. And then he would make a whole story behind it. And it was like, that didn't happen, Michael. And he's like, yeah, whatever. Pressure. Because some people perform better in pressure. Some people in that pressure-filled situation, they do great. But others, when there's no pressure, Or when there's pressure, they do terrible, but when there's no pressure, they're great. And one is not necessarily better than the other. I guess if you're a highly paid athlete, you probably want to do well under pressure, because pressure has to do with a couple factors that go into it. It is, what is someone doing to try to stop you from doing what you're doing, right? Like anybody can hit an open shot, like anyone can do it when there's no one around you, but when someone's guarding you, when someone's trying to stop you from doing it, that becomes a lot harder. But there's a second element of pressure that we see in lives, and we can extrapolate from sports, which is also the expectation. What expectation is on you? Like, what are people expecting of you within this idea? There was recently a really large soccer tournament that was happening in Europe. I know like 7 of you watched it. It was great for us 7 that watched it. It was the European Championships. And the final game went to a penalty shootout. It was between England and Italy. And England had this immense national pressure on their team. Like, I mean, immense pressure. They haven't won anything since 1966. They'd been singing all these songs. The Queen wrote them a letter. Like, there was really big pressure on them. And the Italians, they were just Italian, you know? Like, whatever. We win, we lose, we're gonna drink espresso and whatever. They didn't care. I mean, they wanted to win, but no pressure. They don't live for pressure. And so they go to the shootout, and long story short, England lost. And 3 guys that are extremely good athletes, incredible soccer players, some of the top people in the world, missed or completely hit the worst penalty shot of their life. And the reality is, it wasn't because they're not skilled. They are very skilled. Pressure was there. There was an expectation of a country and a very large Italian man trying to stop them from doing what they were doing. And what's funny is afterwards, like on Instagram and on different like social media, you have all these people like filming themselves shooting a penalty shot. Like, how hard is it to do this? And it's like, not hard when no one's watching, no one cares, and no one's trying to stop you. Anybody can do that. You could probably go and do it. But it's very different when we're under pressure. And some of us like pressure, but some of you, I know you're here, the thought of something being pressure, like a pressure decision or something coming in pressure, it's like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do it. We're all different, and it's okay. It's okay, because one is not better than the other, because as believers, we're actually called to be able to handle pressure in a way that's different than the world. And we're going to look at that here in Colossians, because that's what it is. But if you're here and you're bad at pressure, you don't like pressure, it's okay. We're going to talk about the solution. But if you're here and maybe you say, no, I love pressure, it's good. I want to just kind of give you something that brings it into context so we can understand the playing field that we're in. I happen to be someone that I've actually always loved pressure-filled situations. Like, I grew up playing sports. I liked pressure. The higher the stakes, the better. Like, I enjoyed it. That was something that I rose to. And I don't even think I really cognitively understood how deep that was ingrained into me until last summer. I was with some friends. Some of them were newer friends, like I've only met them as adults, and then some of them were high school friends. And we were at the lake, and I was learning how to wakeboard. And I've never wakeboarded before. I've never done any water sports. I'm not a surf guy. I'm not a rollerblading guy. I'm not a skateboarding guy. Like, all these things that require balance and things in which you can wreck and hurt yourself, I've always stayed away from. But I was with these guys, and they wanted to teach me how to wakeboard. And so I was like, great, this is going to be so much fun. And they all wakeboard all the time. They grow up, they're like lake life and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. It was cool. And so they were doing all these tricks and like trying to do stuff. And so I was just trying to learn. They gave me some pointers, and then like most dudes, like they gave me the very bare minimum with no extra help or tips. I'm like, just get out there. Guys know what I'm talking about. Girls are like, why didn't they help you? I don't know, that's what we do. It's like the bare minimum, like, hold on, lean back. That was what I got. And I'm like, okay, thanks guys. So we're doing it. And so I went a couple times, and I got up the first time, but I couldn't really steer. And then I kind of got up the second time, same thing. Like, whatever. I was just having a good time. We were out there. When you get to my age, you just don't want to get hurt. That's the number one goal of doing anything. Don't get hurt. And so I was like, I'm doing really successful at this not getting hurt thing. And then one of the guys, again, this is the one who didn't know, he met me as an adult, so he hasn't seen, he started talking a little trash and started trying to make some like friendly wagers about whether or not I could perform a particular task within this, wakeboarding scenario. And one of my best friends, one who grew up with me in high school, he was there, and he's like, hey man, if you want to win this bet, you're doing it the wrong way. Don't challenge him and don't amp up the pressure. If you want him to lose, then just make it just be a normal thing. But if you want to lose, just put pressure on there and make it ultra competitive. He's like, I'm telling you, he performs under pressure. And I was in the water, and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, but this just got serious to me all of a sudden. All of a sudden, I want to become the greatest wakeboarder in the history of wakeboarding. Now, that didn't happen, just FYI. It wasn't like one of those movies where all of a sudden I was doing like flips and stuff. That did not happen, okay? But whatever the challenge is, I don't even particularly remember what it was. I got up, I did it like right in his face, and then I was like feeling like the best person in the world. I lost my wedding ring. It flew off in the process, but that's okay. It was rubber. So we go through, and like I do this, but I realized at this moment, like, I like pressure. So fast forward or rewind or whatever the time sequence is. I've been watching too many sci-fi things. I go through, and my wife and I take over the church. We're coming up to 3 years when we took over the church. And I thought, man, there was a lot of things going on that we were walking through that were difficult things as a church during that time and during that transition. There was a lot of pressure. And I thought, great, this is why I'm here, because I love pressure. And so I decided, I'm going to do this on my own. And my body completely betrayed me and rejected this pressure. And I found myself thinking, this is too big, and this is a pressure I cannot handle. And God said, yeah, because these kind of pressure, this isn't sports, Jonathan. It's not wakeboarding. This is heaven and hell. This is church. This is true life. You cannot handle this pressure. And it was in those moments that I realized, oh, okay, it actually doesn't matter if you love pressure or hate pressure. When you're hit with life's pressure, there's only one thing that you can find yourself, and that is being rooted to Jesus and allowing him be the one who carries the burden. And it was in that time that I received a revelation of him being able to handle the pressure and the pressure in which Jesus performs in. And so I want to take a look at this letter in Colossians, and we don't have a ton of time today, and I want to walk through, narratively speaking, filling in the narrative context. This is written by when Paul, one of his many prison stints, it's the only reason we have so many of his letters is because he slowed down just long enough to be arrested, and so he was in there, and so he's going to be referencing things that happened before. He's going to have these hyperlinks, especially in this scenario. He's going to be referencing some of Jesus's teachings, and the cultural context that we're looking at, this is written to the city of Colossae. This is in Asia Minor or modern-day Turkey. These are mainly Greek or non-Jewish believers that he is dealing with and talking with. Paul has actually never met this group of believers. It was started by another person that had been saved by Paul, and he went and witnessed and created this church is here. So Paul's never visited them, nor has he met them in this time. And there's a particular situation that's happening. There is some religious persecution going on, but in Colossae, what is happening and what is being told to Paul is that they're under a lot of pressure in the way that they're supposed to live. And here's what was going on. The Greeks and Romans of this time, they were what was called, or what we still call today, polytheistic, meaning they believed in many gods. They had many gods that they worshiped. And so what happened was these people were saved through the message of Jesus Christ, and they believed in Jesus. They were told he's the only way, that this is the one true God, and they believe it. And when they were sharing it with their friends and their family, they're like, man, that's so great. I'm so glad you believe that. Let's just add them to the group of all the gods that we all believe, right? That's like cool. You can believe that, but just add it to all of them. Like, that's fine. Like, it doesn't have to be the only, it doesn't have to be exclusive. It doesn't have to be right or wrong. Just bring it in with the other ones that we already worship. Like, that's totally fine. So there was this pressure to conform to what society was already doing and what society already had, which is, hey, that's fine. You can add it. Each person can worship whatever they want, right? Just don't tell me it's the only one. So there's this pressure. But then on the other side, you had these Jewish believers who came, and they were talking to these new believers or converts of Christ that said, man, it's so good that you accepted Jesus. Now we're going to teach you how to really live holy. Like, Jesus got you here, that was great, but we're going to take you over here. You are going to now learn how to live really holy. So they began to try to teach them about different Jewish cultural and ritual or old covenant ideologies. So things like circumcision and what they should and shouldn't eat, and certain fast days and holy days and festivals and sacrifice. Like, there was all these things. They were saying, hey, yeah, Jesus is okay, but let me tell you what's really going to make you live a holy life. It's doing these things over here. And so they found themselves under this pressure of either adapting and being reintegrated into the culture in which they came from, or being integrated and adapting into a culture of religious law and conformity of a certain set of old beliefs. And so when Paul heard this message that this is where they were at, he comes and he says, I want to tell you The truth of Christ Jesus is all you need. He is the only way, and he is the only thing you need. And so he begins to write a message to the Colossians to instruct them on how to deal with pressure and what to do with this. And so I want to look at this. He starts off in verse 15. He writes this is the poetic section of this particular verse, and this is what he will refer back to throughout the rest of the letter. And it starts in verse 15. Is one of my favorite things. It says this: Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. I love that. I love that when I think about Jesus in the Gospels, I'm not just thinking about a great man or a prophet or a really cool dude or someone who could do some magic tricks. I'm literally thinking of the very incarnate creation of God, the visible image of the invisible God, that if I ever want to know what the character of God is, what his heart is, what is important to him, I can look at the life of Jesus Christ and I can know, here he is, the visible image of the invisible God. It says he existed before anything was created and is supreme over all creation. For through him, God created everything in the heavenly realms and on earth. He made the things we can see and the things we can't see, such as thrones, kingdoms, rulers, and authorities in the unseen world. Everything was created through him and for him. He existed before anything else, and he holds all creation together. Christ is also the head of the church, which is his body. He is the beginning, supreme over all who rise from the dead. So he is the first in everything. For God, in all his fullness, was pleased to live in Christ, and through him, God reconciled everything to himself. He made peace with everything in heaven and on earth by means of Christ's blood on the cross. So you can see, before he even begins to address the issues that this particular church was facing, he took some time and he said, let me just remind you about who Jesus is and the supreme nature of his being and what he is and why we do not need to add him to other things that he created, because these things are mere images of things that are made of wood and stone. They are nothing compared to who God in Jesus' life is. Or let me tell you why he doesn't need to have things added to him, other rules or regulations of man's making. And so he begins by pointing to this picture of Jesus being the middle and the most important thing in which we get to walk through. And then for time's sake, I'm going to jump to Colossians chapter 2, verse 8. It says this, because this is him talking about some of these pressures. He says, don't let anyone capture you with empty philosophies and high-sounding nonsense that comes from human thinking and from the spiritual powers of this world, rather than from Christ. For in Christ lives all the fullness of God in a human body. This is him specifically addressing some of the Greek ideology of logic and these different things in which they would try to come through this logical discourse in which they could arrive on why something was true or not. He was like, don't let this idea of what is man-made and the system be the thing that either logically accepts or logically declines what God is doing in your life. He said it's just high-sounding nonsense. And then jumping down to verse 16, he says, don't let anyone condemn you for what you eat or drink, or for not celebrating certain holy days, or new moon ceremonies, or Sabbaths. For these rules are only shadows of the reality yet to come, and Christ himself is that reality. Don't let anyone condemn you by insisting on pious self-denial or the worship of angels, saying they've had visions about these things. Their sinful minds have made them proud, and they are not connected to Christ, the head of the body, for he holds the whole body together with its joints and ligaments, and it grows as God nourishes it. You have died with Christ, and he has set you free from the spiritual powers of this world. So why do you keep on following the rules of the world, such as don't handle, don't taste, don't touch? Such rules are mere human teachings about things that deteriorate as we use them. These rules may seem wise because they require strong devotion, pious self-denial, and severe bodily discipline, but they provide no help in conquering a person's evil desires. Wow. He basically says, listen, we can set up a whole bunch of rules, a whole bunch of do's and don'ts, and if you do them, they're good, but here's the problem. Doing certain things and not doing certain things, and walking on certain days and not walking on certain days, those things do absolutely nothing to curb the evil desires that you are born with as a person of this earth. It does nothing to help you fall in love with God, and it does nothing about creating righteousness inside of you. In fact, he says in other places of his scripture that the very law is what incites evil to rise up inside of you, knowing that it's something that you should or shouldn't do. And so he's pointing out both of these dichotomies. He's saying, listen, don't let someone tell you that there's this whole thing and like, it's okay, your way can create this thing and every path leads to goodness and this. He's like, don't do that. He's like, but also I love where it says the idea of don't handle, don't taste, don't touch. Like, he basically is like, don't think that these things, even though they may make you feel like you're doing a lot, they will not result in you curving or denying the evil nature, the human nature, or the flesh that's inside of you. And he actually gives us the answer before he gives us this list of problems. And so I actually want to go backwards because this way is what helped me have an understanding. In verse 6, it says this, and now, just as you accepted Christ Jesus as your Lord, you must continue to follow him. Let your roots go down into him, and let your lives be built on him. Then your faith will grow strong, and the truth you were taught, and you will overflow with thankfulness. The second that I read this verse, especially having an understanding of what comes afterwards, this dichotomy of people trying to pull you one direction or another, and the pressure of trying to create conformity and having you fall one way or the other. When he said that in verse 7, let your roots grow down into him and let your lives be built on him, I was instantly transported to two different teachings of Jesus. And I believe that's exactly what Paul was wanting to link you to. The first one, and there's several teachings about this whole idea of roots going down in him. If you were here last year when we did our Rooted series, we talked all about this idea of roots and rooted. But one of the teachings that was brought up to me is in Matthew chapter 13. And this is where Jesus tells the parable about the 4 different types of ground and the seed that's scattered. And he says, like, there's these 4 grounds, and he sows these seeds, and different things happen depending on the ground. And Jesus ends it, and he says, anyone with ears to hear should hear. And then he walks off. And the disciples were like behind him, like, yeah, anyone with ears to hear, hear. And then they got a little further away from the crowd, like, Jesus, we don't have any clue. I don't know what you're saying at all. I heard you, but I didn't hear you. I don't know what any of it meant. And there's 4 grounds, and one of them's good, and the other 3 don't sound particularly good. So I need some help, Jesus. So in verse 18, Jesus gives an explanation, which I love when Jesus gives an explanation. Sometimes Jesus just leaves them out there to think about it. Like sometimes it's like, knock and it'll be open kind of an answer. But he gives them an answer and he says, now listen to the explanation of the parable about the farmer planting seed. The seed that fell on the footpath represents those who hear the message about the kingdom and don't understand it. The evil one comes and snatches away the seed that was planted in their hearts. The seed on the rocky soil represents those who hear the message and immediately receive it with joy. But since they don't have deep roots, they don't last long. They fall away as soon as they have a problem or are persecuted for believing God's word. Pressure. The seed that fell among the thorns represents those who hear God's word, but all too quickly the message is crowded out by all the worries of this life and the lure of wealth, and so no fruit is produced. The seed that fell upon good soil represents those who truly hear and understand God's word. They produce a harvest of 30, 60, or even 100 times as much as has been planted. Now this is good, and this gives me an explanation, but it's like, but Jesus, how's my heart? Like, how do I get to be that 4th ground? How do I make sure that I have roots and different things? And I want that. Let's keep going. The second thing that he mentions in that verse 7, and he says, and let your lives be built on him. So let your roots grow in him, let your lives be built on him. And I'm taking the Matthew chapter 7, and this is at the end of his Sermon on the Mount. And this is where he talks about the people or the opportunity. He says, anyone who follows my teachings is like someone who builds their house on the rock. Verse 25 says, though the rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise and the wind beats against that house, it won't collapse because it is built on bedrock. When I read this, I thought about something, and I have all sorts of rooted stuff. You know me and trees. I just want to talk about them a lot, but I'm not going to talk about trees today. Maybe a little. He said, built in the bedrock. And it got me thinking about something that I read a while ago, and it's actually something that's modern. Modern construction. You know, something I've always been amazed by is these modern skyscrapers that we as a society have been able to build, right? They're incredible. Like when you go to New York, I got the opportunity to go to New York a couple years ago, and like you see these giant buildings and you think, how in the world do these things not fall over? Like, how is it possible? When I build my Lego towers, at some point, no matter how good my base is, it comes down. Usually it's because a toddler knocks it over. But despite that, there's a point where it just doesn't work anymore. Like it's gonna flip over, it gets too top heavy. And I look at these things, I'm like, there's no way. And I had done some research on the One World Trade Center, the newer building that they built in New York. And you know, it's 1,776 feet tall. That's like huge. Like, and it's not even the tallest one in the world, but I mean, it's massive. And it's an incredible building. And I remember reading about the way that they're able to build it so high is because of the foundation that they put underneath it. And it talks about how in that building, they have 150 feet below the ground, they have the foundation. They've gone that far down, 150 feet. And when you hear that, you're like, that's a lot. I mean, that's really deep underground. And they talk about how much concrete there is and all this kind of stuff. You're like, wow, that's really cool. I like numbers. But I still like, but you know, if it's 1,700 tall, I mean, 150 underneath, that doesn't still feel like the right ratio. It still feels like when the right storm comes, you know, I've seen trees, they just gone, whole building. Like that still doesn't seem like the right ratio, but I found out the reason it works is because at the bottom, they extended what they call rock anchors, 80 feet into the existing bedrock that is there. So they build down this foundation, but then from that foundation, they pier themselves 80 feet, multiple, I can't remember how many piers there are, into the bedrock. And what that does is it connects you to something that is literally like the earth itself. And now as opposed to I've got the footprint of my building, I went into the bedrock and the bedrock goes everywhere. It's wide. And if you know anything about trees, you know it's not the deep roots that create stability. It's actually the width of the roots that create stability. That's why redwoods, they don't even have very deep roots, but they have really wide roots and they connect with other trees around them and they create a root system in which they cannot be blown over, not because of how deep they go, but because of how interconnected and how wide they go. These modern skyscrapers is the same thing. It's not that they went so deep. They wouldn't be able to go deep. They'd have to have equal parts. But they went deep enough to connect to something that was bigger than themselves. And it went wider. And it went wider. And all of a sudden, in this idea, he says, let yourself be rooted in me and let yourself be built upon me. I think of how many times he says, when you accept Jesus, you have been grafted into the holy vine, the vine that goes down and creates a root system that you are now part of. You are no longer rooted to yourself or what you're able to create by yourself. That is what I tried to do when I was here. I said, how big of a root system can I create here being the pastor of this church? And guess what? It wasn't very good. But all of a sudden I realized, wait, Jesus, you're telling me I can connect to your root system? You're telling me that you can be my cornerstone, the stone that was rejected is now the cornerstone, and that in being connected to your foundation was here before the beginning of time. The very word that you spoke is what created this earth, so that when I connect myself and I peer myself into you, I'm no longer just so deep. I'm connected to something that's spread out, and I'm connected to other believers around me, and creating something in which when pressure and storms and difficulties and troubles and trials come, it's no longer about can I stand or not. I am rooted or I am founded upon something that is larger than me. So when it comes, guess what? Let it blow. I won't be blown over I won't be shaken. I won't collapse. Not because of how good I am, but because of how good he is. Because of the foundation that I'm connected to. You are called because you are in Christ. No matter if you're good at pressure or not, you are called to deal with pressure well. Because Jesus is inside of you, and you are rooted into him, and you are founded on him, and because your family needs you to stand strong in the middle of when pressure comes, that you are rooted in Christ, that you are founded in him. And so when the enemy of your soul comes and desires to create something in which you are conformed one way or the other, or put pressure on you to live a certain way, you can say, guess what? I'm going to stand on behalf of me and my family, and I am grounded into the bedrock of this very earth. And I will not be shaken, not because of who I am, but I've tapped into something that's far older and far greater and far stronger than anything that man can make. And so therefore, I won't fall. Whether you're someone today who thrives in pressure situations, or whether even the idea makes you uncomfortable, through Christ, you can deal with pressure. It may not help you in your next soccer match, but in life, you are called to live with the pressures. And when the pressures of this world come, and when they're saying the society's trying to tell you, oh, that's fine, you can believe that, but just believe all this other stuff too. It's cool, don't worry. It's fine to believe all this other stuff. Just don't tell, like when you're trying to be pressured to conform to society, you can still stand in love and truth and be rooted in who God is. And if someone comes and tells you these are certain do's and don'ts and don't do this and this, you can say, you know what? My foundation is not based on a man's religious system or man's ideology. I am founded and rooted and built upon the very person of Jesus Christ. He is the one that my life is linked to. He is the one who is edifying me. He is the one who is growing me. He is the one who is creating new truth and new persons inside of me, whose love is restoring me. He is the one that my life will be completely given to. And so I'm not going to fall to the pressure of one way or the pressure of the other. Jesus already died right in the middle so that I could be united to him and linked to something greater than myself. Pressure will come. Pressure will come to you. It will come against your children. It will come against your family. It will come against your marriage. It will come against your health. It will come against your finances, because we live in a world in which the enemy hates you. But I'm telling you, you can be the spiritual Michael Jordan, and when pressure time is on, that is when you show up, because it's not about who you are, it's about who Jesus is in you. And because as he is, so are you in this world. And so Jesus, when the pressure was on, he went to that cross, and with the joy set before him, which was you and I, he laid down his life so that 3 days later he could have the greatest comeback in all of history and rose from the dead so that we could be the prize in eternity of what he gets to present to his Father as the bride of Christ. So if anyone asks you, how do you do it, pressure? Great. Because I'm not the one who has to handle the pressure. Jesus in me does. I have a great foundation. My roots are deep and wide and interconnected to other believers. Because Christ is the one who came before, who spoke the word, became the visible image of the invisible God, who lived a life full of servant love and leadership and compassion, who laid his life down so that I could share that love with others. And how you live under pressure is what makes you look different than the world. We know how the world does with pressure, whether they're good at it or not. But believers are called to live differently. You're called to stand up for your family. And I truly believe that when you continue to rest in Jesus, when you continue to do this, there'll come a point where the enemy will be like, you know what? I think I'm going to just chilled out with the pressure for a little bit, because every time I try to pressure, it seems like he just presses further into Jesus. And the result of him pressing further into Jesus is his life is more deeply rooted. And so I'm getting the exact opposite of the result, so I'm just going to go bother somebody else. And you may have a season reprieve. But this life is full of trials and tribulations and pressures, but take heart. He overcame them. You're connected to him. You won't blow over. So how do we get to live with the hope that comes from our living hope of Jesus? I think about Psalms 1 where it says, and you will be trees planted along a riverbed, bearing fruit in all season. Because the Holy Spirit, your water source, is constantly watering you, and your roots are so deep because of who you are in Christ, you will never fall short. Father God, I thank you for everyone who's here today. I thank you for this message of your goodness and who you are to us, Jesus. We thank you for what you did on the cross. Father, today, if there's anyone who's here today and they haven't accepted Jesus, I pray that you begin to pull on their hearts today. And if that's you, church, if there's anyone here and you haven't accepted Jesus, we're all going to say a prayer, and I just want to give you a chance to accept Jesus today. So I'm going to ask everyone to repeat this prayer after me. Say, Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for sending Jesus to die on my behalf so my sins could be forgiven, so I'd be rooted to you, and you would become my foundation. It's in Jesus' name I pray. With every head bowed for just a minute more. If you made a decision today, would you just raise your hand real high where you're at? Just as a sign of connection, I just want to pray for you. Anywhere in the auditorium, if you're watching online, they're going to put a phone number up on the screen. You can text that number. It'll connect you with our prayer team. Any hands that are up, they can go down today. If anyone needs prayer after service, our prayer team will be down front after church. But I want to pray for everyone else today that maybe you feel like you've had a lot of pressure, and maybe you've been collapsing under the pressure, or maybe your body's been letting you down under this pressure, or you feel like your mind is slipping in the pressure of what you're dealing with. I just want to pray for you today, and I want you to see yourself as I pray, having your roots transplanted into Christ's roots. We're seeing your foundation peered into the very bedrock of Christ's foundation in your life. So, Father, for every person who's here, Lord, I pray we'd know what we're connected to. We would know what we're rooted to. We would know the foundation, Father God. We would know the fact that you have called us to stand up, to be lights of your goodness, to share your love and your goodness everywhere we go. And Lord, when pressure comes from outside sources, or pressure for us to live a certain way, or pressure for us to believe a certain way, or pressure for us to stand against some of the things that we're facing in this life, Lord, I pray that we would realize our foundation is firm in you, that we won't be blown over, that this too will pass, and the truth of who you are will continue in our hearts forever. Thank you, the one who called us, equip us, and you complete the good work that you've started in us. It's in Jesus' holy name we pray. Amen.